The ballroom sparkled under the dazzling chandeliers, but I felt suffocated amidst the glittering crowd. Tonight, as always, I was the center of attention, not for who I was but for the alliances I represented. My family, together with the Ashford family and the Dalton family, are the most powerful families in the country. A legacy that carried immense privilege but also insurmountable expectations. As I moved gracefully through the crowd, I caught sight of Oliver Dalton, his golden hair catching the light as he laughed with his entourage. He had his arm draped lazily around the waist of a beautiful woman whose name I didn't know, nor did I expect to. She looked utterly entranced as he whispered something in her ear, but I knew from experience that she would mean nothing to him by the end of the night. Oliver had a way of making every woman feel special. For a moment, as if sensing my gaze, Oliver's eyes found mine across the room. A grin spread across his face, the kind of grin that had charmed countless hearts but always made my skin crawl. He disentangled himself from his companion and sauntered toward me, his posture oozing confidence. "There you are," he said, stopping just a little too close for comfort. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." "I didn't realize I had reason to," I replied, keeping my tone light but my expression neutral. He chuckled, a sound that was more self-satisfied than amused. "Come now, everyone knows it's only a matter of time before we're officially engaged. Why fight the inevitable?" I stiffened, but he didn't notice or didn't care. "I must say," he continued, his voice dropping as his eyes roved over my dress, "you've really outdone yourself tonight. But then you always know how to impress, don't you? I suppose it's one of the reasons I've decided you're perfect for me." His words, meant as a compliment, only highlighted his assumption that I had no other choice than him as my husband from the Dalton family and the Ashford family. Well, he is kind of right, because he is the only son in the Dalton family, and the only other unmarried man at about my age in the Ashford family is someone who is assumed unsuitable for marriage. Before I could respond, he leaned in slightly, his voice conspiratorial. "Don't worry," he said with a wink, "I'll take good care of you. And once we're married, you won't have to bother with these tiresome events anymore. Leave the hard work to me, darling." "Hard work?" I echoed, arching a brow. "You mean like charming every woman in the room?" Oliver laughed, utterly unfazed. "A little fun never hurt anyone. Besides, you should be flattered. Most women would kill to be in your position." "Most women, perhaps," I said coolly. "But I'm not most women." Before he could respond, another voice cut through the conversation. "Is this conversation private, or can anyone join?" The voice was smooth, rich, and unmistakable. Turning, I found myself face to face with Felix, his dark, piercing eyes locking onto mine. He was seated in his wheelchair, yet his presence was anything but diminished. Felix was the eldest son of the Ashford family. Known for their sharp intellect and ruthlessness in business, the Ashfords commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Felix, with his chiseled features, raven black hair, and an angular jawline that seemed sculpted by an artist, was the perfect embodiment of their legacy. His striking looks were made even more compelling by the air of mystery surrounding him. Though he had been confined to a wheelchair for years following a car accident, Felix exuded a quiet authority that made it easy to forget his physical limitations. He rarely spoke at social gatherings, preferring to observe, and when he did speak, his words carried an undeniable weight. Some whispered that his injury had taken more than just his mobility, that he was incapable of fulfilling certain marital duties. But Felix never addressed the rumors, and his stoic demeanor left everyone guessing. Felix's gaze flicked to Oliver, his expression unreadable but his presence cutting through the tension like a blade. "Felix," Oliver said, his tone turning brittle. "I didn't see you there. Shouldn't you be off somewhere? Sitting?" Felix's lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "And miss this charming exchange? I wouldn't dream of it." Oliver's smile faltered as Felix turned his attention to me, his eyes softening slightly. "Are you all right?" I nodded, grateful for his interruption. "We were having a private moment. Oliver said dismissively. You understand, don't you? I do, Felix replied evenly, the smile never leaving his face. Which is why I couldn't resist stepping in. It's always fascinating to watch you work, Oliver. You have such a unique approach to conversation. Oliver's face darkened, but Felix's calm, unbothered demeanor made it clear he wasn't going to engage further. With a final glance in my direction, Oliver gave an exaggerated bow. I'll see you later, darling, he said, his tone laced with confidence. And don't keep me waiting too long. A man like me doesn't wait forever. As he walked away, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Charming, isn't he? Felix remarked, his voice tinged with sarcasm. You could say that, I replied dryly. Felix tilted his head, his gaze thoughtful, but he didn't say anything. When I announced my choice to my family, the room went silent. Felix, my mother repeated as if she'd misheard. Yes, I said firmly. I've made my decision. The murmurs began immediately. My parents exchanged wary glances, their concern evident. Choosing Felix, the man in the wheelchair, over Oliver, the golden boy of society, was unexpected, even scandalous. You're certain? My father asked, his voice measured. Absolutely. No one dared to object aloud, though I could feel their skepticism. The surprise extended beyond my family. Words spread quickly and soon the entire social circle buzzed with the news. Oliver's reaction, predictably, was the loudest. She's out of her mind, he said to anyone who would listen. Marrying Felix? A cripple who can't even... He trailed off, laughing cruelly. Well, she'll be begging me to save her soon enough. I ignored the gossip, holding my head high as preparations for the wedding began. The ceremony was nothing short of magnificent. Felix spared no expense, orchestrating an event that silenced even the harshest critics. Yet despite the grandeur, Felix himself remained distant, his expressions polite but guarded. As the evening wound down, I found myself sitting beside him at the bridal table, the noise of the crowd fading into the background. Thank you, I said softly, glancing at him. For what? He asked, his tone neutral. For this. The effort you've put into today. He studied me for a moment before nodding. I don't do things halfway. It wasn't a warm response, but it was honest, and I appreciated that more than empty platitudes. Life after the wedding was quiet but strange. Felix treated me with respect, ensuring I had everything I needed, but he kept me at arm's length emotionally. I was determined to bridge the gap, starting with small gestures, bringing him his favorite tea, organizing his extensive library, and learning about his interests. One evening, as I carefully dusted a row of antique books, Felix entered the study. You don't need to do that, he said, his voice softer than usual. I know, I replied without turning around. But I want to. He was silent for a moment before saying, You're different from what I expected. How so? I thought you'd resent this arrangement, he admitted. But you surprised me. I smiled to myself, encouraged by his words. The incident happened on an unassuming afternoon. I had ventured out to visit a charity event, one of my initiatives since the marriage. On the way back, our car was intercepted by a black SUV. Before I could react, masked men surrounded us, dragging me out despite my driver's protests. Fear gripped me as they forced me into their vehicle, their intentions unclear but undoubtedly malicious. The ordeal didn't last long. Within minutes, another car intercepted us. Felix's men, armed and efficient, surrounded the attackers. Felix himself emerged and unyielding, his cold fury palpable. Let her go, he commanded, his voice like steel. The men hesitated, but they were no match for Felix's team. I was pulled to safety, trembling but unharmed. Later, as we sat in his study, Felix finally broke his silence. They were sent by someone trying to weaken me, he explained. You were the easiest target. I stared at him, my emotions a whirlwind. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to involve you in this side of my life, he admitted. But clearly I underestimated the danger. For the first time I saw the weight he carried, the responsibility, the danger, the constant vigilance. My heart ached for him and I found myself reaching out, placing a hand on his. "I trust you," I said quietly. Felix looked at me, his guarded expression softening for the first time. Over time our relationship deepened. I made a point to show him that he wasn't alone, whether through small acts of kindness or simply listening when he chose to open up. Felix, in turn, began to let me in, sharing pieces of his life and his plans. The revelation of his true condition came unexpectedly. I found him standing one evening, his wheelchair pushed aside. "Felix," I gasped. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "I was going to tell you. But I needed to be sure of you first." "Sure of what?" "That you chose me for who I am, not what I can or can't do," he said. His words hit me like a wave. I realized then how much he'd tested me and how far we'd come. Later, I learned from Felix that the car accident that had left Felix in the wheelchair wasn't an accident at all. It was an attempt on his life, orchestrated by members of his own family, jealous of his position as heir and eager to seize control. Felix survived, but just barely, and the betrayal had changed him forever. Rather than confront his enemies head-on, Felix had made the calculated decision to feign weakness. He allowed the world to see him as diminished, incapable of leading or posing a threat. In doing so, he shifted the attention away from himself, giving his rivals a false sense of security while he quietly gathered evidence and bided his time. For Felix, the wheelchair was both a shield and a weapon. It protected him from further attacks by making him appear harmless, and it allowed him to observe his enemies without suspicion. Behind his stoic facade, Felix was plotting his revenge, determined to dismantle the network of betrayal that had nearly destroyed him. When Felix finally took his revenge, it was swift and decisive. The family member responsible for the car accident that had nearly killed him years ago was exposed and disgraced. Felix reclaimed his position as the head of his family, standing tall, both physically and in power. Oliver, meanwhile, tried one last time to humiliate me. "You must feel foolish," he sneered. "Marrying him. But I suppose I can forgive you if you—" "Stop," I interrupted, my voice firm. "I don't need your forgiveness. Felix is everything I could ever want." The final blow came when Felix appeared, standing beside me with undeniable authority. Oliver's expression turned to shock, then fury as he realized he'd been outplayed. When our child was born months later, Felix held her in his arms, his eyes filled with a tenderness I'd never seen before. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "For what?" I asked, echoing his words from months ago. "For choosing me." I smiled, leaning into him. It was the best decision I ever made. And in that moment, surrounded by love and the promise of a bright future, I knew it was true.